Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Lake Winnipeg Foundation's 2022 Annual General Meeting. My name is Marlo Campbell, and I'm the Communications Director here at the Foundation. And tonight, I am also going to be your MC. I'd like to start by acknowledging that Lake Winnipeg is part of the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Nehea, Oji-Cree, and Dakota peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. This is a lake that has long been cared for by the people living on its shores. As a lake lover and as a member of the Lake Winnipeg Foundation, I recognize my responsibility to honor this tradition of care by taking action in my personal life and my professional life to protect and restore these shared waters that sustain us. As we move forward, I want to note we've got two colleagues helping behind the scenes. Madison is our technical facilitator tonight, and Chelsea will be facilitating our Q&A sessions. Some housekeeping for everyone who has joined us. You will note your microphones and cameras have been disabled, and the chat function is also disabled. For the duration of today's event, you will be in listen-only and watch-only mode. And that's been done just to ensure we can effectively track and respond to all the questions you might want to ask tonight. In addition to the formal part of our meeting, we'll have three presentations tonight from Alexis Canoe, Daniel Gladu-Canoe, and our special guest, Dr. Nora Casson. We will have one live Q&A session following all three of those presentations. But you can ask a question for any of our presenters at any time during this event. And we're asking that you do that using the Q&A feature by clicking on the icon that you'll see located in your control panel. Then you just type your question into that Q&A box and click send. Your question may be answered privately or publicly by Chelsea with an answer that will be typed out and posted in the Q&A window. And you can view all publicly answered questions by clicking on the all questions bar and then scrolling down. If your question is selected to be answered live during our session, you will see a notification in the Q&A window. Now, we will have a limited amount of time for that session. We will try to answer as many of your questions as we can, but if we don't get to yours, please do reach out to us afterwards at info@lakewinnipegfoundation.org, and we would be happy to follow up with you. Upon leaving tonight's annual general meeting, you're going to be directed to a very short feedback survey. We would love if you would fill that out. Your thoughts and opinions help us improve our future events. And finally, to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. It will be available on our YouTube channel tomorrow for your viewing pleasure. So let's get started with a poll. This is a chance to learn a little bit about who's on this call. Your answers will be anonymous. You will see the poll question now on your screens. When you visit Lake Winnipeg, where do you usually go? Do you visit the west side of the South Basin, communities like Matlock, Gimli, or Hecla? Do you visit the east side of the South Basin, like Grand Beach, Bascanda Bay, Wisabing, Broken Head, Ojibwe Nation, or Victoria Beach? Do you visit the west side of the North Basin, like Fisher Bay or Grand Rapids, Nisibistic Cree Nation? Do you visit the east side of the North Basin, like Barons River, Mimi-Wisabing, or Poplar River, Uzada-Wisabing? Or do you not visit Lake Winnipeg? Maybe when you go to the lake, you visit a different water body. So let's see the results of that poll. Okay, we've got strong representation from the east side South Basin, but I see some west siders as well. And there are some folks who don't visit Lake Winnipeg, and that's okay because water connects us all. Wherever you visit when you go to the lake, wherever you're joining us from tonight, please consider yourself welcome. We're very happy to have you here. And with that, I'd now like to invite Selena Randall, Chair of LWF's Board of Directors, to call the formal meeting to order and report on official business. Selena.
Good evening, everyone. It's 7:05 p.m. and I'd like to welcome you to the annual general meeting of members of the Lake Winnipeg Foundation. We also welcome all the guests that have joined us this evening. By hosting our AGM online, it's a way to increase accessibility for people living across the watershed. So to everyone here tonight, I thank you for participating and for your interest in the health of Lake Winnipeg. I now call this meeting to order. As I said, my name is Selina Randall. I am chair of the foundation. I chair the meetings of the board of directors, and I will act as chair of this meeting of members. Chelsea Lobson, one of the Lake Winnipeg Foundation staff, will act as secretary of the meeting. All the materials related to the formal business of tonight's meeting have been shared on our website, including the minutes of the last annual general meeting and our 2021 annual report, which includes the audited financial statements. According to our bylaws, notice of the time and place of a general meeting must be given to members, and I would ask our secretary to include in the minutes that the notice of the meeting was sent to all members of the foundation by mail or email. All voting on AGM business has already taken place online in advance of tonight's meeting. All members in good standing were given the opportunity to submit their votes. We scrutinised all the votes. In total, 32 members voted, which means quorum was achieved in accordance with our bylaws. I thank you all very much for taking the time to register your vote in advance of tonight's meeting. I will now go through our agenda and report the results of each motion. Agenda item 1, motion to approve the 2022 AGM agenda. This is the first item for approval for tonight. Be it resolved that the agenda of the Lake Winnipeg Foundation's 2022 annual general meeting be approved as presented. This motion was carried. Motion to approve the 2021 minutes. The second item is approval of the minutes from the last general meeting, which was held on May the 18th, 2021. Be it resolved that the minutes of the Lake Winnipeg Foundation 2021 annual general meeting held on 18th of May 2021 be approved as presented. And this motion was carried. The next item is the approval of the 2021 financial statements, which were audited by Talbot and Associates. Be it resolved that the 2021 financial statements provided by Talbot and Associates be approved by the members of the Lake Winnipeg Foundation, and this motion was carried. Our next item of business is to appoint auditors for the 2022 fiscal year. Be it resolved that the firm of Talbot and Associates be appointed as auditors for the 2022 fiscal year by members of the Lake Winnipeg Foundation. This motion was carried. Following our agenda, we now move on to the election of directors. Our directors work a little behind the scenes to support the foundation. They bring a wide range of skills and experiences to issues that we need to discuss and decisions that we need to make to keep the foundation heading in a planned and strategic direction. The following people were recommended by Lake Winnipeg Foundation Board for election as directors: Becky Cook, Claire Herbert, Catherine Dompierre, Franklin Dome, Florence Eastwood, Amanda Cast, Bruce McLean, Jonathan Patterson. To ensure continuity of our board and allow directors sufficient time to gain experience before taking on an executive position, we are gradually shifting to the length of term that directors serve, and we're moving from 2 years to 3-year terms. As such, members are asked to vote on 2 motions related to this agenda item. Be it resolved that Catherine Dompierre, Florence Eastwood, Claire Herbert, Franklin Dome, Amanda Cast be elected to the board of directors of the Lake Winnipeg Foundation for a term of 2 years. This motion was carried. Be it resolved that Becky Cook, Bruce McLean, Jonathan Patterson be elected to the board of directors of the Lake Winnipeg Foundation for a term of 3 years. This motion was carried. At this time, on behalf of the Lake Winnipeg Foundation, I would like to acknowledge the outgoing directors, Jodie Gertson and Roger Ramsey, whose terms on the board came to an end over the past year. We thank them for their service. Jody and Roger have both contributed enormously to the work of the foundation by their participation in board meetings as well as on committees. For example, Jody has really helped progress the work of the foundation with the agricultural producers and the community-based monitoring program in the southeast of the province. Roger has helped us develop essential materials to support human resource processes and procedures. I would also like to extend a special thank you to Mike Stainton, who has supported Lake Winnipeg Foundation for many years and is a champion of the community-based monitoring program. He has served the foundation in a number of roles on our executive committee, including vice chair, chair before me, and in the past 2 years, he has provided his advice and mentorship to the board and to me in a non-voting capacity as past chair. Jody, Roger, Mike, on behalf of the board, I thank you for your service. If anyone participating in tonight's AGM is interested in volunteering on our board or one of our committees, or volunteering in a different way, or if you have any ideas, questions or concerns, we encourage you to please reach out to us. We are always open to receive information from members and to answer your questions. If you contact our staff, we'll be happy to follow up with you. And right now, the best way to contact us is by email, which appears on your screen right now. And our contact information is also on our website, lakewinnipegfoundation.org. This completes the formal portion of the meeting, and I declare the Lake Winnipeg Foundation's 2022 Annual General Meeting is hereby adjourned at 7:12 p.m. Tonight's meeting is my final task as chair of the board, as I will be stepping down from this position, but I am remaining on the board. I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you it's been an honor to work alongside my fellow board directors, as well as the people on our Science Advisory Council and our foundation staff. They're all committed to improving the health of Lake Winnipeg. It's been a strange 2 years operating so much online rather than in person, and it definitely hasn't been easy for any of us. I'd like to extend my personal thanks to the foundation staff who always do an awesome job, but who have pivoted to new ways of working with great success despite some significant challenges. I think the foundation is strong and has a bright future. Thank you. I'll now turn things back over to Marlo, our MC.
Thank you very much, Selena. Our next presenter tonight is the Lake Winnipeg Foundation's Executive Director, Alexis Canoe, who will be providing an update on some of the Foundation's recent activities. Reminder that the chat function has been disabled, but if you have a question for Alexis, please go ahead and ask it at any time tonight using the Q&A function by clicking on that icon. And we will do our live Q&A session a little bit later tonight. So Alexis, if you're ready, please join us and take it away.
Thanks, Marlo. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Hang on one second. There we go. On behalf of all of these smiling faces, the LWF staff team, I want to thank you, our members, for your dedicated support. We've been interacting with each other through these little Zoom boxes for 2 years now, and it really means the world to us to know that you're behind us as we push for solutions for Lake Winnipeg. Now, normally at the AGM, I spend this time looking back on the year that was. But 2022 is shaping up to be an incredibly important year for Lake Winnipeg. And so I want to spend this time looking ahead at what we can accomplish together this year. LWF is going to be focusing on 2 important advocacy opportunities over the next year. And tonight I'm asking you to join with us to strengthen our collective voice for Lake Winnipeg. The first advocacy opportunity is achieving phosphorus compliance at Winnipeg's North End Water Pollution Control Centre. You only have to have taken a passing glance at the news this spring to realize what a pressing and urgent issue this is. The sewage spills that we've been experiencing over the past 2 months have been alarmingly frequent and remarkably large. And though regular CSOs that we experience just about every year are concerning, these sewage spills this year are different. These spills have been the result of insufficient treatment capacity at our city's sewage treatment plants, and also the result of poor project planning and poor project management. We need to make sure that we fix both of those issues as we upgrade the North End treatment plant. And the work of LWF members has been incredibly important on this file. So far, we've achieved the approval of the interim phosphorus reduction solution. Now, this was something that nobody was talking about until LWF members brought it forward and demanded that it be implemented. Now this interim solution is projected to be complete by 2023 and to reduce phosphorus in the sewage treatment plant effluent from about 3.5 milligrams per liter to 2.5 milligrams per liter. This is a huge success. Without our collective advocacy, over the next 5 years, phosphorus levels in sewage effluent would have increased rather than decreased. So pat yourselves on the back. You've done an excellent job at pushing this forward. And because of you, this solution is in place. But we're not done yet. We still haven't met our final goal, which is achieving phosphorus compliance at the North End plant, reaching the provincial license limit of 1 milligram per liter. So far, the city and the province's plans for upgrades have left phosphorus compliance to the very end of a very long and expensive project, phase 3. But there's no funding commitment in place for this phase 3 part of the project. And there's also been no reasonable timeline presented for its completion. We can't wait for phosphorus compliance. We can't leave the most important environmental protection for Lake Winnipeg to the very end and at the mercy of all the uncertainties. The good news is it is possible to achieve phosphorus compliance faster and cheaper using proven technology that's been used across the continent. And that is through the upgrades to the biosolids facilities. We just need to integrate the interim solution that we've done such a good job of pushing for with the new biosolids facilities that are about to be designed. So this year, we're asking the city and the province to make public commitments that they will do this in the next version of their North End treatment plant upgrade plan. Now, the next version of that plan is due on June 30th, 2022. And it's the 4th attempt to get this plan right. Previous plans were released in January of 2020, September of 2020, and February of 2022. Each unfortunately presented longer and longer timelines towards completion. And the last plan didn't even lay out a plan at all for phosphorus compliance. So call us maybe eternal optimists here at LWF, but we're hoping the 4th time's a charm. And we really need your help to make that a reality. In advance of the June 30th deadline, we're going to be asking the city to commit to proactively designing the biosolids facilities with the interim solution to meet the 1 milligram per liter limit. And we're going to be asking the province to formally amend the North End treatment plant license to require phosphorus compliance through the phase 2 biosolids upgrades. So we're in the process of putting together our official recommendations, and we're going to draft those into a letter to both the city and the province, and we'll be sharing our letters online as soon as they're ready to go. So in advance of the June 30th deadline, you can use the messages in our letters, as well as your own personal experience of algae on Lake Winnipeg, to speak out. Speak out to your city and provincial representatives and let them know that you expect phosphorus compliance at the North End treatment plant to be their #1 priority. This summer, we're also going to be using the hashtag AlgaeWatch on social media. Politicians and journalists do pay attention to social media. They keep an eye on what's trending to see what their constituents' priorities and concerns are. So if you experience algae at the lake, snap a photo and share it online using the hashtag, and that'll help build the momentum of our campaign. Oops. Okay, our second advocacy opportunity is ensuring renewed federal funding for Lake Winnipeg. And this one was a surprise for us. It's not something we expected to have to fight for this year. For 15 years, the federal government has been making dedicated multi-year funding investments for Lake Winnipeg. Now, it certainly wasn't perfect, but the Lake Winnipeg Basin program was continuously refined through its past 3 phases and improved. In the last phase, which just wrapped up in March of this year, there was the most serious focus we've seen to date on meaningful engagement with Indigenous peoples and targeted investment in phosphorus hotspots. And those are 2 critical elements for any real solution for Lake Winnipeg. So we were really looking forward to budget 2022 and a renewed 4th phase of the Lake Winnipeg Basin program. We were even more excited because there were some very ambitious freshwater commitments put forward by the Liberals in their 2021 election campaign. $1 billion was promised over 10 years for a federal freshwater action plan, and Lake Winnipeg was listed among the priority watersheds. Not only is this a significant funding increase for freshwater protection, but the 10-year commitment meant that we could really focus on enacting solutions and not worry about where next year's support was coming from. So imagine our shock and dismay on April 7th when the federal budget was released. We didn't get $1 billion for freshwater. We got 19.6 million. That's 2% of the election promise. And it's not over 10 years, it's a single year of funding for freshwater protection across the country. It's also still not clear how much of that 19.6 million is actually going to be directed to Lake Winnipeg and how much is going to other watersheds. What Lake Winnipeg received was so completely far from what was promised during the election that it totally took us by surprise. Our federal government had failed in the promise that they'd made to deliver critical funding to protect this important watershed and the 10th largest lake in the world. And we cannot allow them to fail again in budget 2023. So I know it seems far away, it's 11 months out, budget 2023, but now is the time to ensure that our voices are heard so that Lake Winnipeg gets the investment that it needs next year. We need to let the federal government know that we expect them to keep their promises. So our upcoming spring and summer newsletter will contain a postcard that you can just rip out and send with no postage expenses to Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault. He needs to hear from you, just as he'll be hearing from LWF and our partners, because the more voices that are speaking out specifically for Lake Winnipeg and Lake Winnipeg solutions, the bigger impact that we'll have. And our Algae Watch hashtag on social media will help with this campaign as well. So again, remember to take a photo when you see algae and share it online. Now, I know these advocacy campaigns can be overwhelming. Each of us is just a single person. These are big challenges, and we're asking senior levels of Crown government to hear our concerns and respond in a meaningful way. But each of us needs to trust that we're also not alone in this. Our individual voices are part of a chorus of concern and care for the lake. And the more that we speak up, the more we'll encourage others to do the same. I know personally that's what keeps me going, is knowing that all of you are behind the solutions that we're putting forward and the change that we're calling for. We owe it to our beloved Lake Winnipeg to speak out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexis, for that. I'm motivated. I want to write a letter now. Remember, if you have any questions about Alexis's presentation or questions for Alexis on anything else, use that Q&A feature on your screen, type in your question, and we will see if we can get you an answer tonight. Our next presenter is Daniel Gladue-Canu, who is the director of the Lake Winnipeg Indigenous Collective. Again, reminding you, publicly answered questions. We've got Chelsea behind the scene ready to type out some answers. You can click on the all questions bar and scroll down as those questions come in. And if we don't get to your question tonight, or if tomorrow, next week, you have any other further questions, concerns, things that you've thought about that you want to talk to us about, please do reach out. Best way is email right now. That's info@lakewinnipegfoundation.org. Daniel, I see you. That means you're probably ready. So please go right ahead.
Thanks, Marlo. Just going to share my screen. All right. Well, thanks so much for this opportunity. First off, I just wanted to draw some attention to flooding out in Peguis and Fisher River and people who've been displaced. Many of those people will be feeling the impacts of waters long after they recede. And I just want to encourage everyone to, lend a hand where and whenever you can. A little kindness is just so important, especially when people are going through difficult times. But today, I was going to focus a little bit on one part of our work, something we've been doing the past year that really brings everything together. And that would be about changing the conversation that we have in this society about Indigenous knowledge. So when we talk about Indigenous knowledge, we're really talking about a multiplicity of knowledge systems. Here in Lake Winnipeg, we tend to focus on Anishinaabe and Neheya knowledge. But this is the information that's rooted in the land itself and carried by generations of people living on the land and on the water. And it's tested over and over, on the land and rooted in our very survival. Even now, with changes across the landscape brought about by climate change or industrial development, knowledge holders continue to put that knowledge to the test, adapting and reconfirming along the way. Pardon me. But up to this point, if you're more familiar with science and the various rigors it requires to sustain itself, you should know that there are many of the same kinds of processes in place for Indigenous knowledge. Sometimes they look and sound different, partly because oral traditions have different needs. But they should never be mistaken as just simply stories or songs. Those too have purpose, and as does speaking our languages, conducting ceremony, or bringing young people out onto the land to learn. And when we speak about the lake with knowledge holders, it's become very clear that much of this knowledge either never makes it to decision-making tables or is lost in translation. And we can see this in many ways, that impacts felt by Indigenous people will go unnoticed, sometimes for decades, until they can no longer be ignored. And whether we're talking about eutrophication or changes in fish migration or tissue or deteriorating the shorelines, Indigenous people have tended to experience these first. Now, we have to understand that lake and addressing the health of the lake, we need to use the best evidence. We should all be very interested in a combined effort of Indigenous knowledge and science. Not that one would be better than the other, but that together they can give us a fuller picture. Now, I would challenge anyone to suggest we have all the information we need, or that decision makers are making the right decisions or informed decisions, when most of the time we still aren't even speaking with each other. So what's to be done? Well, fortunately, policymakers and scientists are starting to see this gap for themselves. We have new laws at the federal level and recognition through the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And with this increasing recognition, we need to move towards more meaningful relationships between knowledge holders and decision makers. So last year, we at the collective developed a guidance document for federal government, and it's something I thought I could share a few of the points from it. So one, establishing meaningful relationships. Well, there's a lot to be said here, and but I think the primary thing I wanted to leave you with is that these should be early and often. So before knowledge is needed or before a project is even conceived, people need to be engaged at the very beginning so that trust can be built. I always think too that people need deliberate accountability. And when it comes down to it, this work can be very difficult. Having to bridge an understanding with a point of view that can be very different is difficult. And in order to hold ourselves accountable, we need to set the goal to do so, and then make a review of whether we've done it or not, whether the people we work with have done that or not. Context is is key to Indigenous knowledge. And knowledge holders are essential to be part of that process, to help keep that context. Once separated, it can lose meaning. And this is true in sciences, but it's critical for Indigenous knowledge, as context is often tied into our languages and our experience on the land, which can often be very locally specific. Knowledge holders, number 4, knowledge holders are not to be treated as subjects, but are in fact experts. Often with the intention of protecting people, there's been an overemphasis on keeping anonymity within Indigenous knowledge studies. But instead, we want to see knowledge holders as contributors and authors in the process itself. And finally, financial support for Indigenous knowledge systems. Just as science requires resources to gather, synthesize, and educate, so does Indigenous knowledge. The difference, though, is felt in the billions of dollars of federal subsidies to science institutions, where elders sometimes receive an honorarium. Addressing this inequity will be a big challenge, but taking steps toward it is an actual act of reconciliation. It could elevate the kinds of collaboration we could do here in this watershed. So at the collective, we're looking to change this conversation through things like public education, through supporting youth and elder camps, something we are really looking forward to this coming year with as we are released from this pandemic slowly. We're also looking to support knowledge holders directly in participating in decision-making processes. And of course, continuing to advocate with governments so they follow through on the commitments they've made to meaningful engagement with Indigenous people. One other thing I wanted to leave you with, something that you may have already heard us speak about, is environmental racism. And I think this idea is just extremely important. I think this idea is extremely important. It's not meant to be a scary thing. The basic idea is that environmental decisions are not made with everyone's best interest in mind. Too often it's racialized communities who carry the cost of environmental damages. We see many examples around zoning laws, pollution, construction of hydroelectric dams, selective enforcement of wildlife regulations. And I would argue that those inequities are signs of a poorly conceived plans that should have no place in this country. Right now, there's a bill in the Parliament, Bill C-226, that seeks to address this inequity at a federal level, and we are working to ensure it passes. And we want to do that so that this watershed, Lake Winnipeg's watershed, and other watersheds across Canada can be healthy and enjoyed by all peoples, regardless of their race. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for that presentation. It's now my pleasure to introduce our special guest tonight, Dr. Nora Casson. Dr. Casson is the Canada Research Chair in Environmental Influences on Water Quality, as well as the co-director of the Prairie Climate Centre and an associate professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Winnipeg. Her research focuses on understanding the ways in which human activities influence water and nutrient cycling across landscapes, and ultimately how they impact the water quality of streams, wetlands, and lakes. She received her PhD from Trent University in 2014 and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We are thrilled to have her here tonight. Nora, if you are ready, please go ahead and share your screen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marlo, and thank you for the opportunity to talk tonight. I'm just thrilled to be here and really excited to talk about this topic, which I've given quite a long title to, leveraging academic research and citizen science to understand phosphorus in the Lake Winnipeg Basin. So I want to take everyone's imagination off the shores of the lake and looking out across the Lake Winnipeg Basin, which, as we all know, extends across several provinces and down into the US. And this is a landscape that is familiar to everyone on the call, and I'm sure people are joining from various parts of the Lake Winnipeg Basin, which is really exciting to think about. And because many of us are from here, we know some of the challenges that we face on this landscape. So I always like to show this picture of a train driving through the winter, because I think it really illustrates, especially across the prairies, how cold it is in the winter, how snow covered, and how flat it is. And in addition to it being cold and flat, we also know that it's an area of a lot of agriculture. Many of the crops that feed us and feed folks across the country are grown right here in the Lake Winnipeg Basin. As a result of it being cold and flat with lots of agriculture, we also have had a lot of human modification of the landscape, like you see in the bottom left picture. Lots of alteration of the drainage, which leads to some challenges in managing nutrients. And then the top right picture is a picture of Killarney, just to remind us that there are streams and lakes across the basin which face some of the same water quality challenges that we see in Lake Winnipeg. And the thing that is underlying all of the landscape processes that occur across the Lake Winnipeg Basin is, of course, climate change. So here I've pulled a map and two graphs from the Climate Atlas of Canada. And what you can see here is that we're seeing dramatic changes in air temperature projected to the end of the century. And so in the province of Manitoba, what that means is our winters are getting warmer. We're losing these extreme cold days, as you see in the top graph, which many of us might cheer about if it means that we, don't have to wrap our scarves quite so tight. But our landscape is really adapted to cold and snowy conditions. And as we lose the cold and lose the snow, we're going to see really profound changes in the ways in which water and nutrients move across the landscape. We're also seeing warmer summers, which is what you see in the bottom graph and also in the map. And as you can see in the map, the southern part of the prairies, which comprises much of the Lake Winnipeg Basin, is one of the areas of Canada that's seeing the fastest rates of climate change. So when we think about phosphorus in the Lake Winnipeg Basin, there's a lot that we know. There's been some really fantastic science, some excellent partnerships with universities and non-governmental organizations and governmental organizations. And there's a lot that we know about where and when the phosphorus is coming from. So these graphs and maps may be familiar to many of you on the call. On the left is a phosphorus budget for Lake Winnipeg, showing the contributions from each of the different subbasins. And you'll see the biggest subbasin contributing to phosphorus in the lake is the Red River Basin coming in from the south of the lake. We also know a lot about when the phosphorus is coming in. So on the right, we see total phosphorus concentration. Those are the orange dots, and we see river flow, that's the blue line. In the Red River at Selkirk, this is just from 1996, 1997. And this is sort of a typical 2-year period where we see lots and lots of flow occurring during the spring melt, when all of the snow across the landscape finally melts and runs off into streams and lakes. And we see elevated concentrations of phosphorus in the stream waters at that time. So much of the phosphorus that's delivered to the lake is delivered during that spring melt. But even with all of the wonderful research that's gone on, all that we know about how phosphorus gets into Lake Winnipeg, there are still a number of key scientific knowledge gaps that remain. And so today I'm just going to talk briefly about two of those key gaps and how partnerships between academic researchers and community-based monitoring data can help address these gaps. So first I'm going to talk about what does climate change mean for phosphorus loading from the Lake Winnipeg watershed. And then secondly, I'm going to talk about how we can perhaps target interventions to reduce phosphorus at a smaller sub-watershed scale. So to think a little bit about climate change, I'm going to take you to a little bit west of where I am. I'm in Winnipeg right now, out into the Assiniboine River Basin, and show an example of a project that some students and I did in collaboration with scientists from Agriculture Canada. And we had 6 watersheds that had been really intensively monitored at the outlet to look at both the stream flow and the concentrations of total phosphorus. And we monitored these over a few years, and we saw a sort of surprising pattern in many of the watersheds in many of the years. And you can see that in the graph on the right. The y-axis here is total phosphorus concentration, and the x-axis is time starting with the spring melt every year in 3 different years. And like we expected, we saw very high concentrations of total phosphorus coming out in that spring melt period, just like we saw from the monitoring data in the Red River at Selkirk. But we also, in many of the catchments in many of the years, saw pronounced peaks in total phosphorus concentration during the summer. And these peaks did not necessarily coincide with large storms that sometimes can transport phosphorus from the landscape to the stream. And so this has really led us to wonder, what will this mean in a future when we have less snow and more rain? Because with these data, we see this seasonal pattern that I'm illustrating in this kind of conceptual diagram here, where you have high concentrations in the early part of the spring driven by snowmelt, but a later peak in the summer that's perhaps driven by in-stream processes. And so this is a place where community-based monitoring data can really help us dig into what underlies these patterns, how pervasive are they, and help us to understand what our streams might look like in the future as the climate warms. So this map here, again, many of you will be familiar with. This is taken from the Lake Winnipeg Foundation Community-Based Monitoring Report from 2019, showing all of the different basins that they monitor. And the color coding here is that the red are hotspots of phosphorus and the green have lower phosphorus loads. And so working with the Lake Winnipeg Foundation and working with these data, we can first of all expand that initial study of 6 kind of small watersheds in the Assiniboine River Basin to look at patterns across a much broader suite of the streams that drain into the lake. And then second of all, we can look at those red catchments and dive into those streams. Literally, we've got 2 students this summer who are going to go into the streams, collect sediment samples, collect water samples, and see if we can try and disentangle what's driving those summer peaks in phosphorus. So I'm really excited about that project. The second knowledge gap I want to talk about is this idea of targeting interventions at a sub-watershed or at a local scale. So there's been a great deal of research attention about what can we do to retain phosphorus in the landscape, particularly in agricultural areas, in order that it stays in the soil and doesn't get flushed into the streams and ultimately make its way to the lake. So a colleague of mine at the University of Winnipeg, Darshani Kumaragamage, has done some really, really excellent work looking at the use of soil amendments. And what she did over the last 4 or 5 years was a series of lab experiments where she went out to fields, took soil cores, and then simulated snow melt by adding snow on top of the cores, letting it melt, and collecting the water that sits on top of the core. So this is a way to simulate snow melt in a controlled lab environment. And through these lab experiments, her work has really demonstrated that amendments such as alum or gypsum can dramatically reduce the concentration of phosphorus in this overlying flood water, which is really exciting. But there's some limitations to how far we can extrapolate from a lab-based study. And so what we've done over the past 3 years, again, working with Lake Winnipeg Foundation, we looked at the community-based monitoring data and said, where are there real hotspots of phosphorus loading to the stream? Let's go and look at the processes in fields within those sub-basins. And so with a really large group of enthusiastic and hardy students, we took those lab-based experiments out into the field. We built these boxes that you see on the left to collect the snow, and we added the soil amendments directly to the fields in the fall, and then we added them in 2020. They sat there all through the winter, and then when the snow melted in the spring, we went out, collected all of the snow that fell into these boxes, as well as the water that infiltrated into the soil, and looked at, did the amendments reduce phosphorus loading into that floodwater under field conditions? And so here are some results. This work was led by a postdoctoral fellow named Ahmed Lassisi. And so he shares these graphs here. And what we've found so far is that the amendments were quite effective at reducing the phosphorus load, which is what's on the y-axis in these graphs, in soils where the phosphorus was very high to begin with. If you see this axis goes all the way up to 30. The amendments had much less of an effect in soils where the phosphorus was lower. So this suggests that when we're going to go out and talk to folks, talk to producers about using these amendments, it would be worth our time to really target them to places where we're going to get that bang for our buck. The soil phosphorus is high, and also we see that the amendments are perhaps more effective. Now, if you think back, way back to spring 2021, you'll remember that it was quite a different spring than we had this year. In 2021, we had historically low snowmelt. This year, 2022, of course, we had historically high snowmelt. So we went back out this year, put the boxes out again in the fall, and collected the snow melt again to assess if this effect varies depending on how much snow you have. Because of course, one thing we know on the prairies is the winters can be really variable. We also are looking at, are the amendments effective in year 2, or do they need to be applied every year? And then also both last summer and this summer, we collected crop yield data to ensure that the amendments don't have any effect on the crop yield, which the preliminary results suggest that they do not. So I'll leave you with these kind of 3 take-home messages. The first one is there is a lot that we know about how phosphorus from the watershed impacts Lake Winnipeg, because there's been decades of really, really excellent work to understand this from a scientific perspective. Even with these decades, there are some critical knowledge gaps that remain, and a lot of those have to do with the uncertainty of the future, particularly under a changing climate. And so by giving these two examples, I hope this illustrates how partnerships between researchers and citizen scientists can be just a really great way to address these gaps. From my point of view, help out the scientists by helping us with these critical data that are really difficult to get, and also by engaging the folks who live in the watershed around issues having to do with nutrient pollution. So with that, I will say thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. I'm looking forward to the Q&A, and I'm also always happy to chat about phosphorus. Thanks.
I too am always interested in talking about phosphorus. So we're a good pair. Thank you so much for that presentation. I feel like I should acknowledge the sun came out while you were talking. So not only was it illuminating for me listening to you and watching your slides, but I feel like Mother Nature is giving me a sign here. It's time for our Q&A. So Nora, if you can stay on screen with us, and Daniel and Alexis, if you'd like to please join us. A reminder for everyone participating tonight, you've got that Q&A icon. So if you would like to ask a question using that icon, we will begin to answer those questions now, and we have some time here, so we will go through as many as possible. The first question, Andrea has a question here. Will there be extra postcards available to send to the Federal Environment Minister? I can field that one. Yes. Yes, there will be. So they'll be in the newsletter, and we do plan to print a surplus. We'll be taking them around to various lakeside communities on both sides of the lake this summer. However, you're also welcome to follow up with us if you have an opportunity within your friend network, if you know of other like-minded lake lovers, or you just want to give it out to your bridge club, your golfing buddies, etc. We would be really happy to provide you with some extra postcards. So thank you for that question, Andrea. Les has a question here. With 48% of phosphorus leaving Lake Winnipeg via the Nelson River, he is assuming that means we are retaining 52%, and that 52% of phosphorus is accumulating within the lake. This sounds like a question for Dr. Casson. Nora, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, that's right. I realized I forgot to put the source on that figure, but it's from the most recent State of the Lake report, which is available from the Lake Winnipeg Foundation website, which is where I got it. So much of the phosphorus which enters the lake is retained in the lake, is taken up by algae or by other plants, and a lot of it ends up in the sediments. Some of the phosphorus that ends up in the sediments stays there, gets locked into the sediments, and it's kind of a long-term source, but a proportion of the phosphorus that ends up in the sediments gets recycled back up into the water column. And so with all of the excess phosphorus that goes into the lake, some portion is building up at the bottom and will eventually make its way back up into the water column. And so that's unfortunately one of the reasons why we don't see necessarily immediate water quality improvements with reductions in phosphorus loading, because there's this long-lasting legacy effect of recycling phosphorus back into the lake. So I always say that makes it even more critical to reduce the loading into the lake, because what goes into the sediments is going to be there for our children and our grandchildren, and that's who we're looking to improve the water quality for.
Great, thank you for that. We've got a question from one of our participants who's remained anonymous, and this person wants to know what causes high phosphorus concentration in the snowmelt itself. I feel, Nora, you can answer this, but Alexis, I'm gonna throw this one to you because I feel like you could maybe speak to this as well.
Yeah, well, Nora could probably do a great job of this, but
you can riff off each other if you want.
Yeah, please jump in. Essentially, as the snow melts, that saturation of the soil is releasing phosphorus that is held in the soil or in vegetative debris on the surface of the soil into the overlying water. So it's effectively brewing phosphorus tea. And then there's just so much of it. And as we're seeing this year with the overland flooding, so much land surface is covered with that, that it carries it into the rivers and then ultimately to the lake.
While we're talking, just can you add to that, Alexis, other sources of phosphorus to the lake? So phosphorus from the soil, where else is phosphorus getting into Lake Winnipeg from?
Well, phosphorus comes from so many human activities on the watershed. So phosphorus in soil could be there through manures that are used to spread for crop growth, through chemical fertilizers. Other sources of phosphorus from urban environments include our sewage. So when our treatment plants are not removing sufficient levels of phosphorus from the effluent that they put into our rivers, so that's a significant source of phosphorus. Runoff on the streets can also create sources of phosphorus. So because it's such a vital nutrient for life, it's everywhere. And we really need to be conscious of all those sources. And from our perspective, rank them from the largest and start checking them off, right? Start addressing them from the top down.
Great, thank you. Nora, I'm going to come back to you with a question from Brian. What area has Osborne soil? I think this was referencing one of the slides you had during your presentation.
Yeah, great question. Soil scientists love to classify things. So Osborne is just a kind of family of soils, and that site is near Randolph, Manitoba, so southwest of Steinbach.
For us non-soil scientists, I'm just curious, what is Osborne soil? What kind of class of soil? Is it good soil? Is it?
Yeah, it's good soil. It's good. That's why there's a lot of naturally occurring phosphorus, and it's a good agricultural area. It's pretty high in clay as well,
Okay.
Which we found out as we're trying to, put our boxes into the field in the mucky fall, and your boots come back covered in clay, and that means that the water doesn't infiltrate very well, so you get a lot of surface runoff, which is also contributing to the high phosphorus loading in that region.
Sure. Okay. Great, thanks. Okay, we've got a question from David. Of course, reducing phosphorus inflow to the lake is the most important. Has there been research into practical methods of extracting phosphorus from the water? Is there potential to sustain this effort by using the phosphorus or reusing the phosphorus? As Alexis mentioned, phosphorus is good stuff, right? Essential for life, essential to help plants grow. Can anyone speak to extracting phosphorus? And maybe let's start with Lake Winnipeg, because I think that's got some innate challenges for that whole hypothesis. Nora, did you want to start? And then maybe Alexis or Daniel, you can jump in.
Sure. So there are, in theory, there are ways in which you could get the phosphorus either out of the lake water or out of the sediments. You could do it naturally. By things with, plants take up phosphorus. So you can, by improving plant communities or by interventions like the floating cattail wetlands that they've developed at IISD, those are things that take phosphorus up. There's also, you could dredge the lake, take up all the sediments and potentially get some of the phosphorus back there. The problem with all of those solutions is they're incredibly expensive and they don't last long if you continue to have phosphorus going into the lake. And also they're potentially really disruptive to other parts of the ecosystem that both we like and the fish like and the rest of the ecosystem components like. So by far the cost effective and the easier thing to do is to reduce phosphorus inputs.
Okay, so theoretically possible, but in a realistic context, not really. Okay. Alexis or Daniel, that was very well answered, but if you had an opportunity to jump in, if you wanted to add anything, it's a question we often get, I have something that I want to put in the lake. First of all, I guess it would require provincial authority. Did you want to speak further to other research, Alexis and Daniel, or other ideas like that?
I would just say that we do hear a lot about solutions like in-lake solutions but they often have been tried on much smaller lakes, and they just can't scale at the scale of Lake Winnipeg to counteract everything that's happening in the lake's huge watershed.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to go to a question from Mike and Nanette. Since there are so many contributing factors to the phosphorus problem, what steps are underway to highlight and hold all 3 levels of government accountable for their lack of action? And I'm assuming by that you mean civic, provincial, and federal. I'm going to put this to Alexis and Daniel to start us off. What steps are underway? I mean, I think there's some advocacy things. Can you speak to a little bit of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly what we're focused on at the civic level is upgrades to the North End treatment plant. And we've been pushing for solutions there. We've had some success, but there's still more work to do. And I think the sewage treatment plant issue has taken on a priority and a public awareness in the last 2 to 3 years that it just didn't have for decades beforehand. So we're certainly not there yet. And it really is a long haul, right? Like these are big ships to turn, and we need to stick with it because we are having an impact. And if we keep pushing, I think we will make change as we have done in the past. At the federal level, we've been jointly with the Lake Winnipeg Indigenous Collective trying to keep track of, identify and hold to account year over year what's being done, what's working, what isn't, and how the government is performing. Because often what we get is a funding announcement and then nothing further. No reporting on the outcomes that were achieved with that funding, no reporting on the evidence that was used to allocate that funding. So we want to continue to push for that by just being a collective memory of the promises that have been made and the outcomes that have actually been achieved. So we have a number of our advocacy pieces on our website at the Lake Winnipeg Foundation.org under resources for citizens. So you can see there all of our messages to the various levels of government around the various campaigns that we're running. And please use those messages in speaking out as well, because the more voices that are speaking in unison about these concerns, the better. And I know that Elwick also has.
Yeah, I want to bring Daniel in and either just speak about your specific priorities. Also, you mentioned in your presentation, Daniel, accountability, and that's something that Mike and Nanette are specifically asking about. So we know there are steps, we have recommendations. How do we hold governments accountable?
Well, this is something we're trying to learn and perfect every day, right? For as long as we've talked about Lake Winnipeg, it's often people want it to be someone else's problem, right? That it's a sort of this game of tennis, it's sort of back and forth, and pretending it's not their jurisdiction when it's a problem, and then of course stepping up and saying, well, this is our jurisdiction when it's a good thing or something to champion. So I think part of it is well, as Alexis put well, is pointing to the very commitments that have been made. Showing the progress or lack of progress made, and not just standing for, well, it's someone else's problem, or it's the municipality or the province or the federal government. All 3 governments have a role, and all 3 governments work for all of us, so they should fall in line.
Okay, so reach out. Don't be daunted to reach out. We are all experts in loving the lake. And so we have power in speaking up, even just with that as our starting point. Thank you. Got a question from Florence. What effect does the current flooding have on phosphorus loading? Nora, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of water this year.
It's a lot of water. And what we know is that the phosphorus in past years, the phosphorus loading is directly proportional to the volume of water that enters the lake. So I think, we don't have the data from this year, but as you look out on the landscape and you see all the areas that are flooded, as that water drains into the lake, it'll be carrying with it a really large load of phosphorus. So that would be my expectation.
Okay. And another question for you, Nora, from Candy. She says the elevated phosphorus concentrations in the summer that you found in some streams, she's wondering, were those straight concentrations or was that loading? And by that she means, were the flows higher as well as the concentrations? Can you speak to a little bit about process there?
Yeah. So what we have found is that when you have a summer storm, you get both elevated concentrations and elevated loads. But when we took out the effect of those summer storms, we still saw this peak in phosphorus. So it was happening in the streams that aren't moving very quickly. That phosphorus eventually gets flushed to the lake. So it looks like there's some either production of phosphorus in situ in the stream or recirculating of phosphorus from the sediments up into the water column. So it's a mechanism that we don't really understand that well yet. So stay tuned. Invite me back in a couple of years and I'll let you know.
Sold. We are recording this, so we now have that on video. Yeah, perfect. I've got a question from Les. He was surprised by the difference in phosphorus content between the Osborne and Red River soils. I now know what Osborne soils are. Good stuff. Given their similarity in origins with centuries of flooding, any thoughts on why we're seeing the difference between the Osborne soils and the Red River soils in that phosphorus content? I feel again, Dr. Casson, if you want to take this one.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the first thing to say is there's actually quite a bit of variability in phosphorus concentrations, even in soils that have the same origin that are in the Red River Basin, even soils within the same order. So I think in the case of the sites that we selected, which again, we selected them because they're adjacent to hotspots identified by the Lake Winnipeg Foundation community-based monitoring network. So that's, we know that there's a lot of phosphorus going into the stream. I think the difference between those two sites probably had a lot to do with the management history of the sites, manure application, tillage practices. So I think that those practices more than the soil characteristics were what caused that difference.
Okay, great. We've got time for a few more questions, and wouldn't you know it, we have a few more questions. So let's see if we can get through these all. Kelly and Brenda are wondering, what is the cause of phosphorus hotspots that are immediately southeast of the South Basin? So I think we're still talking within Lake Winnipeg's watershed. No, I'm going to go to you again, Nora. Sorry, Alexis and Daniel. I'm going to bring you back in, I promise. Can you speak to the phosphorus causes within those hotspots?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I presume, in the Red River Basin, probably looking at this was probably from the community-based monitoring map, is my guess. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's an area that's highly agricultural. The soils are really poorly drained in that area, meaning again, the water doesn't infiltrate down, it runs off over the surface. So there's no chance for any of that phosphorus to get incorporated into the soil. It just goes right into the lake. As to why, one sub-basin is really high and the next one is maybe not so high, that's hard to say exactly. And it's why we kind of need these detailed studies. First, we need the monitoring data, and then we need these detailed studies to kind of investigate what's working or not working at a finer scale. And just to say, there's a scientific reason to do that, but there's also a practical reason, right? We don't have unlimited resources to apply these solutions. And so if we understand what solutions work where, then we can better target resources.
Sure, thank you. And there are a couple of questions, but I want to bring in Alexis and Daniel on that. Just to follow up on that, the idea of the need for long-term data. And I think, Nora, you made a great point about, we had this record dry winter and now we have record wet winter. Yeah, did you want to just sort of reiterate that point in terms of the practical application, yes, bang for your buck, but also that synergy between the citizen science data that's being produced and the academic research that's happening. Do you want to speak to the importance of that long-term data set, Alexis? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm bringing you back in. Yeah.
Obviously there's incredible interannual variability, and that's going to probably become even more pronounced with the changing climate. So we need to know what's happening. We can't take what happens in any one year as predictive of the next year. We need to sample and monitor under a broad range of conditions so that we can track hotspots that remain hotspots over multiple years, right? Because then that means something really is happening there. And that's where the research partnerships are really exciting, right? Because they have the capacity and the expertise to really drill down into those hotspots. Our monitoring data will show where the hotspots are, and our research partnerships with folks like Nora will tell us why they're hotspots. At this point, we can look at spatial correlations, and we have done a little bit of that as we plan for our ongoing monitoring work. And there is a correlation between the application of manure as a fertilizer in those southeast hotspot areas and the locations of our hotspots. And we interestingly don't see the same spatial correlation between the application of chemical fertilizers and our hotspots. So that doesn't necessarily prove anything, but it certainly points us in the right direction for ongoing research and ongoing monitoring.
Sure. All right. We've got, 2 questions left. I'm going to cut the questions here. So we're going to answer these 2 questions quickly, and then we are going to move on with our agenda for tonight. Lindsay has a question for you, Nora. Is eutrophication and phosphorus increases in Lake Winnipeg a topic that's heavily studied with graduate and doctoral students at U of M? She's asking. I know you're based at U of W, but I assume you talk to your colleagues across academia.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, there's a lot of excellent researchers, including many folks on the call tonight, based at U of M, based at government agencies, based at non-governmental organizations. And there's always a lot of student interest in eutrophication and nutrient loading. The really optimistic thing about my job is working with students who are young and enthusiastic and idealistic, and they want to get out there and do this research and find solutions. So it gives me a lot of hope for the future.
That's excellent. All right, the final question is coming to Daniel. Daniel, how do you think environmental racism has affected the most recent budget? This is from Raina, and I assume she's thinking of the federal budget, but we can broaden that out. You talked about environmental racism. Can you give us a specific example of how we see that in policy or in financial planning?
Well, okay, there's 2 things I should say. One is that part of the problem for environmental racism is we don't collect good data for how racialized people experience any number of decisions. There is approximations through postal codes and things like that, but it's not very good. And one of the things that does have to change is better data on that, so we have some understanding, and that decision making can happen around that. One thing I would point out that this is was a bit of a concerning trend, I suppose, is that there is a big focus on natural resource extraction through First Nations, and this is both in the provincial and federal budgets. Money is set aside to do partnerships, and while that's excellent for a lot of reasons, it's a lot more money than is available for those same Indigenous nations to protect those lands.
Sure, thank you for that. With that, I think we're going to stop our Q&A. We could go on and on. So Dr. Casson, Alexis, Daniel, thank you. You can stop sharing your screens. If the other questions come to the folks who are attending tonight and you do want to get your questions asked, please do reach out to us, info@lakewinnipegfoundation.org. I would also like to just acknowledge the sunlight is beaming into my house now, and while I'm loving it, I'm recognizing that you might not be able to see me, but we're going to move forward anyway. We're nearing the end of our meeting tonight, and I just want to take a quick opportunity to give you an update on our summer 2022 event season. Planning is well underway. Of course, we are preparing once again, or should I say still, to adapt to public health situations as we need to, but we are really excited to get out into communities and connect with as many of you as possible. So A few confirmed events launching on Friday, July 15th and running through Saturday, August 5th. We've got our Bid for Lake Winnipeg online art auction. This is your chance to bid on a variety of amazing work. On Friday, August 5th, Bike to the Beach is coming back. Says cyclists are once again challenging themselves to ride from Winnipeg to Victoria Beach to raise funds for a healthy Lake Winnipeg. And on Sunday, August 7th, we've got our Walk for Water Victoria Beach and District, returning once again outdoors to the Village Green in VB. And it's a great time. It's a family-friendly 2.5 kilometer walk. It's a really great opportunity as well to come out, meet your fellow lake lovers, meet LWF staff, and join together in a show of support for freshwater solutions. Planning is still happening, as I mentioned, and we will be confirming more details of more events on both sides of the lake in coming weeks. The best way to stay updated is to visit our website, lakewinnipegfoundation.org, or to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, it's time for our last poll of the night. What is the most helpful tool LWF can provide you with to help you advocate for the lake? You've heard from our presenters today. Are you looking for more information on the issues? Are you looking for a template that you can use when communicating with your elected officials? Would you want contact information? Who do I email, and which person and where? Are you looking for content or messages to share on social media? Or would you like all of the above? So what is the most helpful tool? A reminder, your votes are anonymous. And I'll give everyone just a little bit more time, and Madison behind the scenes, when you have all voted, will show us the results. Okay, it's pretty split, although slightly to all of the above. Hedge your bets, I get that. And you know what? We are trying to do all of that for you. Again, please do visit our websites to learn more about advocacy, or again, feel free to reach out. We're happy to assist you however we can. Wonderful. And with that, we're going to conclude our annual general meeting. So a few closing remarks. A reminder, if you do want to know more about the Foundation's work, to visit us online, lakewinnipegfoundation.org. If you'd like to know more about what the Lake Winnipeg Indigenous Collective is doing, please visit their website, lwic.org. They're also active on Facebook and Instagram. I want to thank again Selena, Alexis, and Daniel, and special thanks to our special guest, Nora, and thanks to everyone who asked questions of our presenters and really helped us all learn together about the issues. Thanks again to Madison and to Chelsea for your help behind the scenes. And a reminder that when you do leave this webinar, you'll be directed to a very short feedback survey, which we encourage you to fill out so that we can improve for future events. Finally, on behalf of all of us here at the Lake Winnipeg Foundation, I'd like to thank you for your continued support with your donations. It really is because of you that a healthy Lake Winnipeg is possible. So thank you for your passion, for your curiosity, for your enthusiasm, and for your commitment. And with that, we're going to end tonight's meeting. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.